Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is facing a second anti-Semitism row after he was forced to suspend another parliamentary candidate. Joining me now is Chris Williamson, former Labour MP, who was blocked from standing as a candidate under Jeremy Corbyn because of accusations of anti-Semitism. Has Sir Keir Starmer changed the party? Hello, Chris. Nice to see you.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi. So, Chris, what is going on? Do you agree with, I mean, it's good that Azhar Ali made an apology. Do you agree with that apology that he made for his comments?
Well, I don't think he should have made an apology, Nadine, because what he said was not anti-Semitic. What we've got is a situation now where the Labour Party is in a complete shambles. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer's led the party
Hang on,
into
whoa,
a
Chris,
whoa.
Sorry, got to stop you. You've just said his comments weren't anti-Semitic. He espoused a conspiracy theory that...
Well, it's a conspiracy theory that's been, as you say, a conspiracy theory, but it's a proposition that's been carried by many mainstream media outlets. I mean, there has been speculation. It's not speculation that I agree with. I think it was wrong, but it's not anti-Semitic. And what we're seeing here is, again, is the conflation of opposition and criticism to Israel, criticism of Zionism, with anti-Semitism.
Chris, I'm sorry. You've made a really fundamental point that we have to challenge. You are saying that Israel allowed the slaughter, the rape, the beheadings of 1,200 of their own civilians to give them an excuse to go into Gaza. No,
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, Nadine. What I'm saying is that, I mean, I don't agree with that proposition that's been put forward, but it's not anti-Semitic.
You just said that it's a proposition being espoused by mainstream outlets, which I've not heard. Name one mainstream outlet that is running with that theory for why we are in the situation that we're in now with Israel and Gaza.
I think it's been carried in the New York Times for one, as far as I'm aware. But the point is, Nadine, that criticism of Israel or espousing a theory like that doesn't equate to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is hatred and bigotry against Jews. Israel is a Zionist entity that is engaged in a genocide, and we should be absolutely criticising.
And what were Hamas doing? And what were Hamas doing when they crossed? Because you're quick to talk about what Israel's doing. What were Hamas doing when they crossed the borders into Israel and beheaded babies in their cots? What were they doing? What was that?
Well, that's not true, Nadine. There's been no evidence for that at all. And indeed, actually, quite the contrary. I mean, the people that made those allegations have recanted and said that, that it wasn't true. So, the allegations of rape and beheading of babies is simply, Zionist propaganda. It's nonsense. It's not true. I mean, why was the prison breakout? I mean, let's remember that Gaza is a concentration camp. It's been sealed off for, 17 odd years now, since 2007.
You're calling Gaza a concentration camp?
Absolutely, yes, of course it is, because, people are penned in there. I mean, they can't leave. Anything that can go in.
That's not the definition of a concentration camp? That's not the definition of a concentration camp. They're being held. They're being held there. People in Gaza, Gazan civilians, are being held there because they are being used as human shields by Hamas.
No, that's just nonsense, Nadine. I'm sorry. It's more Zionist propaganda. The truth is that the Gaza Strip has been sealed off, and
people could move to North Rafah, but they aren't because Hamas aren't allowing them to.
Well, look, I mean, Israel was established.
The IDF are asking them to move to North Rafah, and people can't because the Hamas are not allowing them to move because they want to keep them in South Rafah because they want to use them as human shields.
Israel is engaged in a genocide. They've murdered, getting on for 30,000 people. Over 10,000 children have been killed by these Zionist terrorists, which is what the Israeli occupation force actually is.
What Hamas? What would you do? How do you describe them?
You talk about Hamas, but it's the entirety.
Will you say to me now, Hamas are terrorists? Are Hamas terrorists, Chris?
You always put this question out in the media. It's very odd. Look, Israel was established 75 years ago.
You just called Israel terrorist.
Israel emerged out of terrorism. Let's remember.
So, Chris, tell me, no, I've got to nail you on this, Chris. If you're going to say that Israelis and the IDF are terrorists. What are Hamas? Tell me. Give them the word you used to describe them.
The Palestinian resistance fighters. That's what Hamas and Islamic Jihad and
you won't call them terrorists.
The liberation of Palestine. But look, you have to put this into context. Israel has been occupying Palestine for 75 years. They've been imposing terrorist tactics, actually, an apartheid system, which they've imposed on the Palestinian people. Created on land, as a result of a massacre. Let's remember that 750,000 Palestinians were
Chris, I'm sorry, Chris.
From their home in 1948
Chris,
in the Nakba.
If you can't call Hamas terrorist, I can't talk to you. Cut the interview.
Fine. Goodbye.
Thank you, Chris Williamson. Matthew Stadlin and Madeleine Grant are still with me. I find that utterly unbelievable.
Well, it's not surprising. I mean, the man has a track record. In the autumn, he tweeted that Israel had forfeited its right to exist. It's chilling. It's chilling.
So, my earlier point, there's something really dark happening at the moment. University campuses, inside a Sainsbury's supermarket the other day, inside a Soho theatre, on our streets, outside MPs' homes. And we have someone who's a former Labour MP, I don't even know if he's still a member of the Labour Party, who's refusing to call Hamas terrorists.
No, he was suspended. I think we need to be clear about that. He was suspended by Labour, and Chris Williamson is...
He's suspended, isn't it?
Chris Williamson, one of the reasons why I couldn't vote for the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. It is true, of course, that we can criticise, anyone can criticise Israel without being anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
The question is, what motivates, and I'm not pointing the finger at him, I thought his failure to call Hamas terrorists was utterly contemptible and disgraceful. I'm not levelling specific allegations against him. I'm talking more generally. If someone is critical of Israel, they may use Israel as a means to vent their anti-Semitism. But someone like me, with Jewish heritage, is highly critical of what Israel is doing in Gaza. But I can tell you right away that what Hamas did were acts of, I've described them as medieval barbarity because of the methods used, the images that were coming out. They were acts of deep evil. And if there is someone who is so caught up on one side that they cannot see that what Hamas did was way beyond any sort of pale, then they've got serious issues.
I know people are going to say, oh, you couldn't debate with him, you should have allowed him to have his word. But honestly, you can't have it. It's a bit like you can't negotiate with or debate with Hamas because their abiding principles, they just want to... Let me finish speaking, please, Matthew. Their abiding principle is that they just want Israel wiped off the face of the earth. The same with people like Chris Williamson, who refuses to acknowledge, he speaks in kind of like forked tongue, doesn't he, And
the former Labour leader himself, Corbyn, was sitting probably in this studio itself. How many times did Piers Morgan have to ask him whether he would call Hamas terrorists?
Can I just push back on one specific thing that he said? Because, obviously there's an awful lot to push back on in what Chris Williamson was saying. But that point that he said about how it was widely reported in the media that they had...
I think it was the New York Times.
That's not what... This is an important thing to clear up. In these articles, they were not arguing that they had deliberately ignored. They were saying that there had been perhaps some intelligence that they hadn't paid close enough attention to before the massacre. That is worlds away from deliberately choosing to ignore it and therefore using that as a pretext to invade Gaza. So it's one of these things that's really important. Sometimes with these conspiracies, they're playing on something that there may be like a tiny grain of truth, and then they use that to extrapolate something that's so disgusting.
That's absolutely spot on.
It is, Madeleine, a really good analysis of that point. And Madeleine, it's the reason why in these very dark days that we're living in, journalists need to be really as careful with their words as anybody does and what they report. So